Okay, hello, my name is Madeline, and today I'll be analyzing the poem One Art by Elizabeth Bishop. For the title, before I read the poem, I thought of one art as maybe interpreting art or finding art in everyday beauty, maybe talking about the author's favorite piece of art or how she views it. And going into the text, paraphrasing it, first stanza says, "The art of losing things isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster." Losing things is not difficult, I think the author is saying here. So many things get lost so easily that losing them comes almost naturally. Second stanza, lose something every day, except the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing things isn't hard to master. That's pretty self-explanatory. Third stanza, she says, "Then practice losing farther, losing faster, places and names, and where it was you meant to travel. None of these will bring you disaster." And just a side note, I tried to get this lined up as best I could. Didn't necessarily work out. Each of the stanzas is supposed to be 3 lines. But anyway, I thought that she was saying by this, you'll start losing bigger things quicker as you go through life, and you won't be torn off about a lot of them, or like they won't be detriments to your life, I think she's saying. Fourth stanza, she says, "I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last, or next to last, of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master." By this, I think she's saying, I lost my mother's watch and moved out of my 3rd house. These things just happen. It's a part of life. Fifth stanza, she says, "I lost 2 cities, lovely ones, and vaster, some realms I owned, 2 rivers, a continent. I miss them, but it wasn't a disaster." I think she's saying, I moved out of 2 cities, pretty ones, therefore I can't see some of my favorite sights anymore. I lost a whole continent when I moved. It was tough, and I still miss them, but I got through it. The 5th stanza, the last one, she says, or the 6th, she says, "Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love, I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing is not too hard to master, though it may look like, write it, like disaster." And this was the most difficult to paraphrase for me. I think she's saying, losing you, everything about you was terrible. It's the worst loss I've ever felt. I keep telling myself that I've lost things I loved before, but you're different. Going into some connotations, some literary devices here, I put the lines that I'm going to be talking about in green and orange. So when she says, "The art of losing things isn't hard to master" multiple times, she's using some repetition there. Same thing with "to be lost, that their loss is no disaster." The word disaster is a big point of repetition in this poem. She's using these points to emphasize what she's trying to get across. And she's also trying to convince herself of these points, I think, especially. She applies these phrases in slightly different scenarios throughout other parts of the poem as well to show that her points remain true in other situations. I think that's another part of her just trying to convince herself that loss is loss. Some more connotation. She's using an extended metaphor to compare her current loss of a person to her past losses of places of things. And she starts out with like the door keys, places, names, where it was you meant to travel. Then it gets into a little bit of bigger things, cities, the whole continent, and then it transitions into a whole person, someone that she loves, someone who was close to her. And I think that's metaphorical in a way. Oops. Yeah. Her attitude, her tone, I think, it's emphatic and forceful, but towards herself. I think this is a very internalized poem, and the author is speaking to herself in a lot of ways. She's reminiscing past losses of less serious subjects to prove to herself that she can handle the loss of a person. This really comes through in the last stanza for me, when she says, "The art of losing is not too hard to master again, though it may look like, write it, like disaster." I think that really conveys her tone. It's definitely like undercut with sadness and grief and mourning because she did lose someone extremely close to her, someone that she loved. but the overall attitude here is that she's trying to force herself to move past her loss. So there's a big shift. Well, there's not really a big shift. It's kind of just like a gradual shift. The whole poem is just movement for me. In the first stanza, the author begins by distancing herself from loss. She continues throughout the stanzas by making each one increasingly personal. This is seen in the words I highlighted in green. So she starts out saying so many things, seem to be filled with the intent to be lost, lose something every day, door keys, places, names, very typical things that you would think to lose, not necessarily anything that's gonna, well, it might mess up your day, not necessarily your life, you might be a little late, but you're not gonna cry over it. And I bolded the words, their loss is no disaster, none of these will bring disaster, because that kind of shifts as well. We'll see in the last stanza. Just some of the same things. She's increasingly losing bigger things. She lost her mother's watch, something she probably valued a lot. She lost 3 houses. She lost 2 cities, a continent. These are very big, like, physical things that she lost. And she says, but it still wasn't a disaster. And in the last stanza here, she says she's losing you. She's talking about a person now. The joking voice, a gesture I love. I think she included that part in parentheses, the joking voice, the gesture she loves, to show just how close she was to this person. Kind of like everything about them she missed. And in the last line, I bolded that because throughout the other parts, she's saying it was not a disaster. None of these will bring disaster, etc. And here she's saying, though it may look like disaster. So she's trying to say to herself that although this is changing my life, I can get through it. Because none of the other things, like some of them might have been life-changing, but she worked past them. It's obvious here also that she's hurting the most over this than she has of anything else. And over here on the right, I said that the form of the poem is also gradually lost. I looked up what a villanelle was. It's a type of poem that has 2 repeated rhymes, and we can see that one of them is the disaster one, the loss is no disaster, and the art of losing things isn't hard to master. And it definitely falls apart in the last few stanzas. The art of losing isn't hard to master. That's the only time that's in there, word for word. And then in the last one, it says the art of losing is not too hard to master. And then the last line, she says, though it may look like, write it like disaster. The fact that she's literally interrupting the rhyme with her own thoughts is a big sign that she's trying to convince herself that she can move past this loss. So I'm going back to the title now. After reading the poem, it was not at all talking about art, necessarily in the physical sense, but a social art, loss. The narrator uses everyday things compared to a person she loves to make the point that they are very different, while all being grouped as loss. Like, you feel them differently. You're not necessarily... You lose a person, which is obviously going to affect you much more than losing a watch, forgetting a name, even moving house. And the theme here, I said that the theme was life will come with difficulties, but every bad situation is only preparation for the next one. That's a very, it's not necessarily playing on the emotions of the poem, but what she's trying to convince herself of. So I also pulled out mourning is necessary, but time moves forward. This is conveyed through a lot of the breaking of the rhyme, the kind of the underlying sense that the author is in fact mourning the death or the loss of a person much, much more than she did the loss of things and places. And yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.